IND podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Dunicic. Before we begin, I want to remind you to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Join our growing international community. Our story today is going to concern Russia. Now, the vast amount of our focus and the vast majority of the focus of the other mainstream media outlets that are out there has been on the Russo-Ukrainian War, primarily focused on the events going on in Ukraine. Simply put, because it's a war. People are dying on a daily basis. A major humanitarian crisis is occurring inside the country. And there has been a migrant crisis of 3 million people being forced to leave Ukraine. More than 3 million people, in fact, being forced to leave Ukraine. In addition to this, the massive military and diplomatic talks that have been occurring between Western powers, Ukraine and Russia to put an end to this conflict have taken major media precedence. What is not talked about are the major trends and developments that are occurring inside Russia. Now, of course, the sanctions that have been battering the country have been extensively talked about, with how major American and other Western companies have pulled out of the country, notably leaving the nation without the symbolically important McDonald's and many other crucial services that they've gotten used to live a day-to-day life. Russia has essentially been pushed to an extreme autarky and is being completely self-reliant on itself and is virtually isolated from the rest of the industrialized, developed, and especially Western world. Now, what isn't being talked about is the political situation in Russia, specifically under President Vladimir Putin. Now, even before this conflict, Vladimir Putin, since coming to power in the 2000s, has extensively been, and over time, increasing the amount of power that the gentleman has. Mr. Putin began as a man that was promising to modernize Russia, end crime, and bring a more acceptable standard of life to the Russian people, while also ending corruption. Now, it should be noted that Vladimir Putin has made some major changes to Russia in his early days. Before Putin came to power, it's estimated that roughly 60% of the GDP of Russia was controlled by criminal organizations. Notably, that is not the case anymore, at least depending on how you define crime. Today, the nation of Russia is controlled by an oligarchy centering around the autonomous leader, Vladimir Putin. And this government has been becoming more and more authoritative over the years. And this specific conflict in Ukraine has been utilized to consolidate even further power by the government of Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Putin himself. The most notable and starking example of this is a new law that was passed by the Russian Duma that introduces up to a 15-year prison sentence for anyone allegedly spreading what is deemed as false information regarding the war in Ukraine. Now, as part of this law, the word war is not to be used, as officially speaking, the actions of Russia, as per Vladimir Putin in Ukraine, are a peacekeeping operation. You heard that one right. Now, this law states that the first offense is some kind of financial fine that really isn't all that bad. However, after that first offense, up to a 15-year prison sentence can be given to offenders. And now this law was passed roughly a few weeks ago, shortly after the invasion of Ukraine began. However, enough time has passed for the first criminal proceedings to begin regarding these laws. Some notable people that have been charged have been an Orthodox priest calling for an end to the war in Ukraine, simply for calling it a war. Another individual that has been charged under this new law has been a food and cooking blogger that lives abroad, that lives outside of Russia. Now, this law in and of itself is disturbing because even after the war in Ukraine ends, its principles are probably going to be applied to other facets of Russian life, allowing the government to introduce prison sentences for anyone that spews out information that is not concurrent or completely towing the party or Vladimir Putin's line. What is more disturbing, however, is a speech that Vladimir Putin gave today, addressing the West, and more disturbingly, addressing Russian citizens who are not supporting this war effort. Vladimir Putin obviously stated that the West has been trying to squeeze Russia and create it into a dependent nation. And it should be noted that the West has completely isolated Russia. Vladimir Putin is obviously using the old party talking point of the West attempting to cut Russia off and the entire world being against Russia. An old principle that has existed since the days of the Soviet Union, specifically Joseph Stalin. However, the most disturbing rhetoric was when Vladimir Putin was addressing Russians that don't support the war effort or are not towing the government or the Kremlin line, stating that Russia needs to go through a self-purification process. Now, that is a disturbing principle. Self-purification typically implies that some type of cleansing needs to be done in society. And Vladimir Putin was clearly referring to individuals that are not supporting the Kremlin's foreign policy efforts and people that are not supporting this shameful, unprovoked war that has caused a major humanitarian crisis and has killed thousands of civilians. This is a disturbing trend, not just because of the war and not just because of what the law is stopping in Russia, but simply because no Russian leader, even during the days of the Soviet Union, has used such aggressive and, shall I say, paranoid rhetoric since Joseph Stalin. These disturbing trends simply indicate that Vladimir Putin's authoritarian regime in Russia is growing stronger, and any idea that it would eventually turn towards a democracy can now officially be declared dead. This war in Ukraine will most likely come to an end very soon. Peace talks between the Russian and Ukrainian sides have proved to be very optimistic, now entering a phase that are known as working groups, or more specifically, they've entered a phase where something is concretely agreed upon and both sides are just trying to find a way to make it physically happen, to actually make it be realized. So while the war is continuing, while fighting and shelling are continuing, and while civilians do continue to die in Ukraine, some form of agreement is being hatched out, and peace may be within a month's grasp. But that is not going to be the end of the suffering of the people under Vladimir Putin's regime. It's very clear that this war was not only an attempt to increase Russia's foreign policy and security efforts and interests, but it was an effort to increase Vladimir Putin's power in the country, which was already before the invasion authoritative enough. Russia is entering a new political dark age, one of pure dictatorship. Vladimir Putin, even before this invasion, extended his mandate constitutionally, allowing himself to serve pretty much to the end of his lifetime. Russians now have to ask themselves the question, when is enough enough? When is this government that has been oppressing them for the last few decades going to change? When are Russians going to experience freedom again? When are Russians going to be able to criticize their media? When are Russians going to be able to have the right to choose? And just to speak freely. The government of Russia and the country of Russia is heading into a very disturbing direction that is not just reminiscent of Soviet days, but reminiscent of the days of Joseph Stalin. Even other Soviet leaders have not been this brutal, have not been this authoritarian, and have not been this oppressive. Nowhere near as much as Vladimir Putin has been. This war does not just mark an important period in world history. It marks a crucial moment in Russian history where the nation's any form of semblance of freedom has been completely crushed. No matter how this conflict turns out, the one victory is definitely going to be in domestic policy for Putin, who has consolidated power even further. And now we ask the question, when is Putin going too far? And when will the Russian people say enough is enough and institute a regime change? Thanks for tuning in. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you think this form of government that is being instituted by Vladimir Putin inside Russia is sustainable. And let me know when you think the end of his government and his reign and his rule of power will come to an end. I'll see you guys tomorrow.